Hi, I'm Mary Jo Hoag, and I'm a docent for the Chicago Architecture Foundation. I'm standing in beautiful Graceland Cemetery, located on the north side of Chicago. It is an original Victorian park cemetery established in 1860. I'm standing next to one of the most, if not the most prominent monument located in Graceland Cemetery. The monument is called Eternal Silence. And a question I've often gotten is, what is it, who did it, and what's the point? The artist who designed Eternal Silence was Lorado Taft. Lorado Taft was born in a small town in Illinois in 1860. He was educated at the University of Illinois, where his very famous piece of sculpture, alma mater, still exists on the quad. The monument is in bronze. It's very large, and it depicts a vision of death that is somewhat different. Actually, I would say extravagantly different than your traditional sentimental Victorian monument that came before. It marks the grave of Dexter Graves, who was one of the original settlers in Chicago. He came to Chicago in 1831 before Chicago was even incorporated as a town. And to mark his importance, his descendants had Lorado Taft sculpt this piece of sculpture in 1909. It depicts a vision of death that is somewhat foreboding. It's not as comforting as a traditional Victorian monument. That death can be difficult, that it's individual, that it can be lonesome, and that in some cases it could probably be considered scary. And so people have asked about this, and although I cannot give you an actual idea of what the Graves family was thinking or what Lorado Taft was thinking when he sculpted it, certainly it comes across as very arresting. We're also going to look at another very large piece of sculpture that Lorado Taft did here in Graceland Cemetery. He did it about 20 years later, so it'll be interesting to look at the difference between the two. We're standing now in the burial plot for the family of Victor Lawson. The piece of sculpture you see here was also designed by Lorado Taft, but more than 20 years after he did Eternal Silence. What you see here is a very large Crusader. It's done in a different material than what Lorado Taft used to do Eternal Silence, which was bronze. This is granite, highly polished, and it's got a very different feel about it. Instead of being foreboding and awesome, it's actually rather hopeful, strong. So why the difference? Well, first of all, time has passed. Perhaps Lorado Taft had a very different feeling and idea about what he wanted to do with sculpture in a cemetery. But I think more importantly, it's a very different subject that we're talking about. Victor Lawson acquired and bought the Chicago Daily News when he was only 22 years old in 1875. He made it into one of the most powerful newspapers in the country. He was the first man, for instance, to send out foreign correspondents all over the world to bring in news here to Chicago for his newspaper, the Chicago Daily News. He was also a great philanthropist, and he believed in the power of truth, and he believed in the power of the little guy, and that together you can make a difference in society. You'll notice if you look around this plot that his name is nowhere to be seen. There are no headstones with his name or any of his family members' names on them. All that sits here in testament to Lawson's crusade for the truth is the very large Crusader. Once you've noticed that there are no headstones here with names on them, so you have no real idea of who was here, you begin to understand what the Crusader means when you read the actual words on the monument. The words say, "Above all things, truth beareth away the victory," hence the Crusader. My guess is that Taft was thinking of who Victor Lawson was, a crusading newspaper man for truth. And that is where the idea of the Crusader came from.